Welcome to the Silicon Slopes Live. We are joined today by Michael Sears, who is the Managing Director.
General Manager
of
Yeah.
Salt Lake City Angels.
Yes.
And a practicing attorney at Stoel Rives.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Pronounce that right.
Stoel Rives, that's
Right,
what I'm going
Rives.
with. I'm not 100% sure. I'm going with Stoel Rives. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that one's either or.
Yeah, that's
in the
neither
daily
or.
discourse.
Yes, that's neither or.
Gotcha. So we're going to talk about your roles in both organizations. But there's a few of you in the community that I've got to know over the years that are attorneys and entrepreneurs and heavily involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So
Yes.
You've been with the Salt Lake City Angels for many years now.
Uh-huh.
And you're the chief cat herder, obviously.
Yes, I play an important role in herding cats.
I've been involved in sending you deals, so I've seen how that works. And then back in the church and state days, you guys would have your meetings there.
Yep.
And one of the funniest lines, I watched a whole Salt Lake City, or Angels meeting go on, and then you get up and you discuss the deals, and you said, This is where the blood met the water.
Yeah.
I don't know how often you use that, but the poor entrepreneur is up there, and the Angels were just grilling him.
Yeah.
And then you give a summary of it all. But let's talk more about you being a startup kind of focused attorney.
Yes.
You interact with a lot of startups over the years. What services do you provide as an attorney, both when you're on the clock and then just for like your friends and pals?
Well, that's great background, great questions. I think I would start in the sort of at the beginning. I went to law school. I grew up in a very small town here, Cedar Hills, not quite so small anymore. Here in Utah, went UVSC at that time, then University of Utah, and then Boston for law school. So I was in Boston. I like to say it's the dumb side of the river. So I was on the non-Harvard MIT side of the river. That's Boston College, Boston University. I was at Boston University. And I got there a great education, or at least great insight into how world-class, what I would characterize as world-class startup ecosystems work. And what I mean by that is, by my third year at the law school, I was primarily taking courses that counted towards my Juris Doctorate, the JD, at the Graduate School of Management, so at the business school, and sort of chopping it up with entrepreneurs and people looking to raise capital. And it was incredibly easy to get a hold of anyone. It seemed like everyone was available, whether they had IPO'd a company or whether they had sold a company or whether they had numerous failures, recent failures in their past. And during law school, I started a couple companies with a friend here, lives here, we're still friends. So ultimately, when I came back, thinking, well, I'll raise one of these, I'll raise money, I'll sort of live that dream, I did what most kids who are raised in small towns in Utah County do, which is lift where they stand. And so I started volunteering. It started with what was then known as Wayne Brown Institute, now venturecapital.org. I still volunteer there. It's still a wonderful organization that helps companies and founders dial in their decks for raising money. That led me directly into the Salt Lake City Angels, where some of the teams that I was a volunteer on for venturecapital.org were members of the Angel Group. The existing general manager, Peter Collister at that time, was leaving, having gotten a company funded, and I sort of jumped in. And that's the beginning. That's how I got involved, and in fact, that's how we met. You were doing Start SLC. You, Stephen Walter, some of the other folks probably here were starting that, and that was the very first public screening meeting we did, and it was at your request, and I thought it was a brilliant idea. I'd love to do it again. We did another one at Church and State, and I think they're enormously helpful for the entrepreneurial community. But ultimately, I ended up closing the businesses and spent so much time advising, not in a legal capacity, of course, but just informally describing how the deals worked for investors or how raises worked for entrepreneurs, that I decided, well, I should practice law. I mean, I should be paid for all the time I'm spending helping these investors or founders with some of the technical details around their financings and the progress they're making. So I went and practiced in the Bay Area at first because I viewed that sort of as Mecca. And I only came back, I would have only joined maybe a handful of firms that I felt like I knew the people there and loved the people there. Stoel Rives was at the top of that list. I got the chance to come back and work for Stoel Rives. They're a sponsor of the Angel Group, so that's how I sort of knew those guys closely. And I would say in that capacity, it's full service. It's everything from like formation all the way to an exit, a sale, hopefully a favorable sale. Primarily, and my interest in joining Stoel in particular is their commitment to our emerging company space. So we have, I feel like we're still almost in the middle of a Cambrian type moment where we're growing and money's flowing in, and we have an amazing entrepreneurial ecosystem because of universities like Brigham Young and to a lesser, though growing extent, the University of Utah and UVU now. So partly because of our ethos here in Utah, we have this incredible entrepreneurial community. Capital is now flowing in. I would have always said that we're underfinanced and capital constrained. I feel like that's changing. It's changing in part because of companies that have exited and created new millionaires, and those millionaires join angel groups, and it becomes somewhat of a virtuous cycle. So it's been very gratifying for me over the last, I appreciate you self-censoring on the amount of time I've worked for the Angels, just signifying how old I am. But it's been very gratifying to go from Cambridge, where it's an obvious example of this is the entrepreneurial community working, and seeing it here, and to play just a very small role in that has been fun.
Yeah, not a small role, a very instrumental role for a lot of people. That's a unique perspective, and I failed to connect the dots, when you're in Boston, that you're seeing it, and then you're able to kind of see it in the infant stages here. All right, so your role with the Salt Lake City Angels.
Yes.
Real quick, let's go through the process that an entrepreneur might expect.
Yes.
And then we'll go into what happens after that.
Okay, so typically, now we have a website, and we're always working on improving the website, but right now that's one funnel point where we would learn about a company, they would submit a deck, and that deck would be reviewed by me, or I would send it to another investor and say, or an investor and say, hey, would you take a look at this? This is fintech or some med tech, something where I don't have as many reps looking at it through the lens of, would our investors be interested in this deal? Does it sort of check the box from a screening meeting caliber company? Ultimately, the first step after submission, whether you submit it via direct email, referral, and referrals are always preferred, I think. Yeah. The next step for an entrepreneur is the screening meeting. I can go into great detail about that, but it's pretty simple. It's a 10-minute presentation followed by 5 minutes Q&A. Right now, in sort of COVID, it's been mostly Zoom. I feel like that's working better. I feel like we get better attendance, and investors are certainly capable of gathering the necessary details in a 10-minute presentation to ask informed questions and make a determination about whether or not they want to look more into the company. If there's interest from the investors, that company moves to a general meeting. That general meeting, we hold ours at a restaurant with audiovisual. It's Primo Restaurant. We've tried to do that throughout COVID. Obviously, it's, the people there, we've checked with the restaurant, the staff wants to work, they like their jobs, checked with the members, those who are comfortable go. We've tried to transition to, part digital, part in person, and that's been difficult. That's usually about a 30-minute period. From there, it moves to due diligence, and from diligence, it moves to an investment decision. So that's the stages, and I would say for the audience, the benefit of that is, in my experience, most groups work that way. Now, there are quirks between like Utah Angels 2, UA2, or Park City Angels, or Salt Lake City Angels, or other like Tech Coast Angels and bigger groups, but most have a process by which they screen companies, review companies with a fuller group, and then ultimately make an investment decision among the interested members.
Yeah, perfect. So I think most people are familiar with that. So angels is a nice way of referring to some of these people because they've got a little extra folding money, but some of them are grumpy. And
Yeah, that's true.
but it's also good for the entrepreneurs, right, to get run through the ringer. I've talked to a ton of people after they've pitched to angels, and their eyes are as big as saucers. So like, I feel like I just got hit by a Mack truck. I'm like, well, that's kind of how the world works. So, how do you manage and facilitate the angels, right? Because you started out really pretty young,
Yeah.
and a lot of the angels aren't young.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you've got to manage personalities and egos and all of that. How does that go for you?
Well, that's fair. Every person in there is like, should be there, right? We have accredited investor standards. They have to meet them in order to, comply with the security laws. And there are egos that come along with that. I would say in general, I try to prepare entrepreneurs beforehand that you're going to get some tough questions. That part of raising money, and there really is an art to it, and not that I'm an expert, but I've certainly been a close observer and can advise around the pieces that I've seen so many times to feel comfortable identifying a pattern or counseling, whether it be a client or just a company I'm mentoring. It's always, it can be intense, and there's always sort of a meta level analysis where, and what I mean by that is you're getting terrible questions, like the guy or gal didn't get it, but you have to take the responsibility and answer it in a super professional manner because you're on the clock. This is your currently best available opportunity to impress and attract the money that you need to scale your business. So,
Yeah, you got to sing for your supper.
yeah,
every once in a while.
that's right.
What are some of your favorite stories and some notable investments that have happened over the last couple of years?
So I think the funny stuff, and I don't know why I would share this, but I think any one of the members who listens will get a kick out of it. I have had our group look at companies in what I would describe as like a toilet paper company, like, butt stuff. Those were all referrals, and they were led into the screening meeting based on the angel or outside party that referred them. That's a funny thing. I think the notable companies, I would cite some. I have favorites, right? Like I have a bias. I think we remain woefully underfunded on life science deals, and that's one of the ways the University of Utah could be most exceptional. And for whatever reason, it's my opinion that they haven't really found or unlocked the full value. We have members like Brandon Rosenhan started a small fund, Men Mountain Ventures. We're trying. Ron at Church and State, same space. We're trying. Like that's an effort that we continue to make. So we have those in our portfolio companies. I happen to be the son of a small business owner, so I'm always interested in technology that helps SMBs. We have some of those. Ovation Up or Ovation Zach Oates. I don't know if you've seen them. That's an example of one that I would say failed is a breast pump company, Naya Health. That was out of the Bay Area, and great entrepreneur, Janica Alvarez, who was a local. And I think it's good to highlight some of the ones that don't always go well. But that was an absolute favorite. And then, of course, Omni is a company that I think will make a big impact on our entrepreneurial ecosystem and moved from California to Utah. I don't think it's because of our small SLC angel check. Yeah. More likely the slopes, the ski slopes, but that's certainly a favorite.
Gotcha. So over your career as an investor and startup focused attorney, there's been a lot of programs, platforms, and new ways that entrepreneurs can raise money. Mm-hmm. 15, 20, 30 years ago, there's a couple ways. 10 years ago, there's a lot more. Now there's a lot. How do you talk to entrepreneurs about all these different ways of getting funding, and what are some that are most exciting to you?
Well, I take an interest in sort of crowdfunding that has been made available to entrepreneurs. I don't think, I would say that opinions in the legal community, and certainly I would say in our corporate group in the Salt Lake City office at Stoel Rives, I don't know that everybody shares an affinity for that as a means of raising capital. And it proposes serious issues for entrepreneurs in later stage rounds. Even now, through a traditional route like an angel, or let's take a life science company, for example, because that's a good example of companies that have been traditionally, I think, undercapitalized here. So you'll end up with what you might think of as a polluted cap table with a bunch of doctors or ophthalmologists or OBGYNs or whatever who are able to write a check, see the problem, and write a check. But that, now you have a cap table of 55, preferred shareholders, and you've got some real challenges as a CEO under the deal docs that you've signed up for. So that, crowdfunding sort of presents that issue on steroids. Now, there are companies and platforms, and that's just a maturing market. It will mature, and I am excited about it. I think two things excite me in terms of developments. I think the threshold for an accredited investor is lowering. I expect that trend to continue. And I shouldn't say lowering, it's changing, it's broadening. More people can be considered accredited investors than, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And then the crowdfunding platforms do interest me. I do hold out great hope. I think this is this is a solution aimed at a problem that affects entrepreneurs. Of course, we will iterate and improve, and it will be something that founders can rely on for many years to come. That's my hope.
Yeah. And, when you came back into the community, you thought it was underfunded. What's your level on a scale of 1 to 10 now as far as funded versus unfunded?
Well, in some respects, I would think there are much better people to answer that question than me. It's dramatically improved. I mean, some of the funds, we can name some of these bigger funds, and I know the funds are growing, and I know the funds are, new funds are being opened, and new capital is flowing in. That's just fantastic. I mean, that really is so important to us taking the next leap. And as part of that, I would say examples like Qualtrics having an exit or any unicorn having an exit where you create millionaires, even if it's like Fusion.io from so many years ago, where you just create a handful of millionaires who can go out and found companies, self-fund, attract Bay Area money, attract money from outside of our community, as well as seed capital for the next batch of entrepreneurs, college kids starting companies.
Yeah. And, bottom line, there might be more competition with funds and ways that entrepreneurs can get funding, but you can if you're a fund or private equity, you can swim downstream or swim upstream, and there'll be healthier entrepreneurs and companies, and you can fund those.
And I would say, where we're at right now, just in terms of, we got Jobs Act, access to crowdfunding websites. I would say every entrepreneur who listens to this within the next however many 12, 24, 36 months should exhaust the traditional routes. That's still the best way. I think in part, two parts. A, it's realistically the best way. Yeah, is there emerging opportunities? Yes. But are they fully mature? In my opinion, no. And moreover, in raising sort of traditional angel venture capital money, you're ensuring that you're broadening your access to human capital and a knowledge base and a portfolio companies that are part of that particular fund for that VC or past funds. And that's, enormously valuable to have the right investor. That's all we're talking about there, and everybody would agree that's enormously valuable. That requires exhausting traditional options, even if you are like a gaming company in the Midwest or even Salt Lake, where maybe there's not a ton of money here for that. You should still exhaust it, even if it means traveling or beating down the door of investors in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether you're on the clock or off the clock with your 9 to 5,
9 to 5.
You're a very kind person, and I've given you over the years a bunch of just dumpster fires, where they're friends or interns or whatever, and they've got a startup and they're actually gaining traction, and they'll ask me a bunch of complicated questions. I'm like, I don't know, but I sense that this is off a little bit, or I think you've done some things incorrectly with the way you've structured it legally, or your cap table seems off. You get a lot of those.
Yeah.
Not just from me, from
Yes.
others.
Yep.
So if you had a Michael Sears dashboard, you'd probably have like 5 or 6 things that keep coming up with the grease fires. What are some of those, and what, if you could talk to the entrepreneur maybe a year before they get to you with this grease fire, what are some, 2 or 3 things that you would advise them to do out of the gate?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I think, formation and entity choice. I would say some of the worst challenges that you face, and these are for good companies, by the way, that are going to raise money, but they'll take on convertible debt as an LLC and then have to convert later. And that can create large tax consequences for founders, great founders, smart people, good tax advisors. It's just sometimes in business, as you know, you just don't know exactly where it's going to go. And if you really start, if you catch fire, you may create a ginormous problem for yourself down the road. That's one that pops up that I sort of try to jump up and down and flag and yell about and say, like, look, guys, this could be we're talking big tax bills. Yeah. So large 6 and even 7-figure numbers. So that's an example of one. IP assignment would probably be top 3 as well. Some, when you first start out, I think there's a sense, I know personally, there's a sense that it's all going to be copacetic and go super well. The reality is, of course, that it doesn't always, and the investor is only, the investor cares about the team, and oftentimes you'll hear them say, well, we're backing the jockey, not the horse. That's an example of where they're investing in the founders. But still, from a legal perspective, the equity they're purchasing is in the company itself, and that requires that the intellectual property and sort of the value the business provides its customers is owned by the corporation itself. Yeah. So that would be, those 2 would be top of the list issues that pop up. Either in the first case, wrong entity choice with convertible debt and some follow-on tax consequences being the largest and probably most painful, and the IP being easy to solve. There are a lot of agreements out there. Everybody's attorney will have a form IP assignment. Everybody who's consulting for the company or working for the company should sign that as part of their employment or consulting. That should just be baseline good corporate hygiene, because the corporation's got to own the goods if you're going to raise the money.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about giving too much equity away or not enough equity, or giving it to the wrong people? Because I've had people offer me equity for helping them with a pitch deck or connecting them with a person. Like, that's very nice, but you probably shouldn't do that. How often does that happen, and what can you do to remedy it?
It's a great question. I think I have a non-traditional view of this, and I would particularly aim my feedback for the first-time entrepreneur. And this is granted, this is like the world according to Mike Sears, and you should take this with a grain of salt. But my view is I would not be parsimonious with equity. I would be interested in incentivizing as many talented people as possible. And if you own 10% of a $100 million company, you're going to be much, much happier than owning some larger percentage of a much less valuable company. And the reason why I say first time is I really do think there's There's like Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm comes to mind, but there's almost like a distribution, that same Gaussian distribution for entrepreneurs in terms of their scar tissue, their learning, their ability, their interest and ability to take on risk. And I would just say get a base hit. I would say focus on the base hit, and that means you have a capital stack. Every company has one. It's made up of equity, debt, and human. And I just would not be trying to be super parsimonious with the equity side of that capital stack, because the human capital is so essential to the company's early traction. So that would be one perspective, and I would pair that with, sort of the legal perspective of, well, it's going to be vesting anyway. You're not an employment agency. In startup land, one of the things that we don't talk about is people get fired, and it can be sort of ruthless that way. And this is just outside looking in. Of course, I would never run a business that way, but just kidding. But there are vesting schedules for that exact reason. Like, you're trying to go from A to B, and if the person can't get you from A to B, a typical vesting schedule is 4 years with a 1-year cliff. So you've got sort of this large grace period. And if the person is pulling his or her weight and providing sufficient value to justify that equity grant, what do you care, right? If their weight is adding millions of dollars in the overall, enterprise value, what do you care as a founder? So and if they're not, then you obviously move on and sit them in a different seat on the bus, to borrow from Jim Collins, or however you approach that as a leader and as a founder. Yeah. But the idea that we're going to worry more about, is it 2 points on either side for this hire, is just like, no, just make the hire and let's go focus on the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to have some fuel for the engine.
Yeah.
All right, so it's not as easy as starting a business and exiting it, right? Mm-hmm. As you well know. And there's a bunch of tricky or weird or just not fun stuff that pops up along the process. And for a lot of people, that might be the financial side. For a lot of people, it might be the legal side. And they might try some duct tape and baling wire to figure it out on their own. But at what point should they reach out to somebody like you and get their ducks in a row?
Well, I would say early. And granted, I'm biased as an attorney, and that's part of my livelihood, but I would say most startups, I'll speak for Stoel Rives. Stoel Rives is very serious about taking care of emerging companies, of meeting their pressing needs, being aware of their pressing needs, and designing solutions that these companies can afford. So earlier is better, and part of the reason why, and this, I think, this analysis would apply more broadly to the general, general populaces or viewership here and their attorneys. Part of the reason why I would say you want to loop in whether it be whatever the service provider, right, whether it's finances or whether it's law, is you get on their paper, and that ultimately lowers cost over time. There is a large switching cost when you go from like Clerky to, Stoel or some other, because their attorneys are trying to push this work down to the most cost-efficient person to do the work, and it's easier to push that work to a cost-efficient place if those documents are sort of form documents that this associate or this first year or this paralegal or someone, right, no matter whatever their level of experience, they'll be pushed the right place. But it saves so much time if you're just staring at the same thing you've looked at 100 times previously. You can identify the issues much, much faster. Yeah,
absolutely. And so there's a lot of industries that are slowly coming into the modern age. Whether it's through AI or automation, any sort of kind of machine learning. And legal, there's been some changes in the legal system that are more entrepreneur friendly. Like old Henry Ford, getting Ford Motor off, that was probably that much legal work. Yeah. Now it's much less, and it's easier to understand. Yep. You don't have to be a lawyer to be a startup. company founders. So what are some of those changes, and how do they dovetail into a traditional law firm, or what is worrisome for a traditional law firm?
Well, I think I do think there's a sense in the legal community, or at least an open question, and maybe this is just me and sort of our reference group, our age range, thinking about, the commoditization of services and whether or not, if software can do this, if it's so rote that software can do it over and over and over again and just bang it out, well, that's, first of all, from my perspective, that's ideal. Like if we're serving clients or founders at a lower price, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And I would like to see more deflationary economics in legal services. So, but the challenge is, and what I think one of the largest challenges in this space is software-based. Computers are thinking in ones and zeros, and legal docs are entirely prose-based. And even when you use a typical, like if you take like scikit-learn algorithms off the shelf, that's Python, and you plug it in and you break out your n-grams or bag of words algorithm and you plug it in and you try to make sense of it in a way that you can automate. It's actually pretty terrible, and it's pretty hard to get that level of like the confidence interval that you would need to progress with the deal. So that's a long-winded way of saying essentially you can start a company and I think off the shelf automate a great deal of that, because if it's brand new, it's plug and play, and you can plug in the information. We sort of know how we want that to look. We know what a typical Delaware corporation looks like as it goes through its financing rounds. It gets more complicated, and computers just right now, I would say, aren't there. Like the algorithms aren't there, the software isn't there to automate for all the different corner cases that you're going to see. So we'll see, Garrett. I mean, we'll see if we can as deflationary economics sort of push down, and that would be a very good thing, how high that can rise before it sort of reaches its max ability to provide the value that no longer justifies, and it's like, okay, I got to pay this gal who has 25 years corporate law experience $500 an hour or $700 an hour or whatever, because it's so complex or whatever, or I just have to get the right answer. And right now we can't. That just isn't, you can't pull that out of a box yet.
Gotcha. So the timing for you being an attorney was good. You won't be out of a job in the next 10 to 15 years.
Depends on what I say here, but yeah.
But if you're just graduating law school today, you might be looking behind your back at old AI bot.
Yeah, that may be true. And typically the way technology works, we do see this exponential growth, and I would expect the exact same thing in terms of, I just named a handful of old-timey algorithms that people would have been working with 5-7 years ago. And when it reaches that point, that would be a fantastic thing, and I would expect it to move very quickly. But it's a leap in computation and not just training material for the algorithms.
Yeah. Well, you've got a plan B, fly fishing guide somewhere
That's right.
in Montana,
That's right.
which is way better than talking
better.
about legal documents.
Much better.
Might not pay as much,
Right.
but the happiness quotient's way higher.
Agreed.
All right. Well, cool. We appreciate you taking the time to join us, and I, for one, know the value that you provide to a lot of entrepreneurs. If for folks that are interested in pitching to the angels, again, the website.
So we have
referrals.
slcangels.com. My email is michael@slcangels. And I would encourage, in terms of ground game for raising money, LinkedIn is everybody's friend. I'll speak for the investors that I work with or participate in the Salt Lake City Angels. They're available for coffee, they're available for lunch, dinner, what have you. I mean, I'm sure the entrepreneur is going to have to buy some of those, but they're available for runs up the ski, up the chairlift. And everybody who listens to this should take full advantage of that and just say, Mike, Sears sent you.
Love it. Cool. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Love it.